Well, good morning. Today we have a very special speaker who some of you may have heard before, Peter Carrington, a former curator of the Beale Botanical Garden, which last year celebrated its 150th anniversary, which is pretty amazing. He has also been a instructor of wilderness survival and edible and toxic plants for 30 plus years. And you may not know, but he's also a talented illustrator, um, a scientific illustrator, which he's done for decades. Maybe he'll show us some illustrations sometime. Um, One interesting fact I learned about Peter today, researching him on the internet, was that he joined the Michigan Entomological Society in the seventh grade and studying bugs for I don't know how many years. But anyway, I'll turn it over to Peter and welcome. You're going to shatter some myths about maples today.
Well, I'll do what I can.
It's all yours, Peter. Go ahead. And if you're not speaking, please mute yourself. But then when Peter's done with his presentation, feel free to unmute yourself with questions and we'll let the dialogue begin.
For sure. When I taught edible wild plants, we always considered maples to be amongst the most innocent and non-threatening groups of plants. At the time, maples had their own family. I don't seem to be able to get to my PowerPoint at the moment. There we go. The Aceraceae was the family of maples. The genus Acer is still the genus that includes pretty well all the maples. The Angiosperm phylogeny group decided to reorganize the classification of plants because we had so much more in the toolbox than we were using. And by the toolbox, I mean plant morphology, the anatomy of parts, as well as the genetic heritage, now that DNA is firmly established as a resource and a tool, and also the chemical products tend to unite various families. And I remember seeing tree books about Michigan written in the 1920s that already anticipated putting the maples in the Sapindaceae, the soapberry family. Of course, this caused some trouble for some people because up to that point, the Aceraceae, the maple family, had been one of the most recognizable and easy to remember official plant families. So in that family, along with the horse chestnut family, the Hippocastanaceae, were subsumed into the Sapindaceae. That was trouble for some people. See if I can get the next slide up here. There we go. One of the mysteries in the last couple of decades about this family had to do with child deaths in India.
Oh.
About 100 children a year were perishing mysteriously, and nobody for a long time could figure out what the common denominators of all that were. But it was mostly children of poor families who were going out after a very small dinner, coming back home, going to bed, and then waking in the night, crying out and delirious. And of those, about 1/3 would perish by the next day. So it was a source of great tragedy in India. Turned out one of the easiest items to track in these cases was the fact that they had such disastrously low levels of blood sugar. And then it became clear that most of these cases originated within a few hundred yards of groves of lychee. Sometimes we call them lychee nuts, although I'm not sure officially, botanically, they qualify as real nuts. But lychee, I'm sure many of us are familiar with.
Yeah.
They are also in the Sapondaceae. And for a while, it was thought that this was either a disease that no one had yet identified or that some fancy new pesticide was involved. But actually, it turned out after dinner, these children were going out into the lychee groves and they were gathering lychee that were not entirely ripe. Because fully ripened lychee apparently pose no great health risk and literally have been used as food for many centuries. Ultimately, it was found that this group in the Sapondaceae contain a relatively unique and fancy toxin, which we call hypoglycin A. And again, it is undernourished children who are presented with the greatest risk upon exposure to this toxin. Another one of the mysteries that came under the purview of this family of plants is a condition usually of horses called seasonal pasture myopathy, which usually occurred in fall and the first half of winter and was a complete mystery for many decades. Ultimately, a team of people, I believe, from the University of Minnesota uh, started going after this mystery. And one of the things they took on was an assay of all the plants that horses coming down with this malady had access to in the pasture. And one of the prime investigators was a very smart person called, whose name is Stephanie Valberg. And one of the things she discovered was almost every case, the horse had a pasture that gave them access to box elder. We think of it as a box elder maple. It is Acer negundo in the proper scientific name. Another one of these mysteries was the source of what is called Jamaican vomiting sickness. Jamaican Africans forcibly carried off to Jamaica as slaves, brought with them the seeds of a tree called ackee, Blaya sapida. This African tree is still growing in Jamaica and also can be found in Florida. It has a fruit which signifies basic ripeness by turning red. But as in the words of a popular Jamaican song, you shouldn't eat it until it smiles at you. And when the song says it smiles, what they're talking about is the fruit cracks open and exposes the seeds, as you see in this slide. I hope you can see this slide. Great. The only edible part of this entire plant is the aril around the seeds. That is that sort of yellowish looking tissue that looks like scrambled eggs packed around the seed there in the picture. That's the aril. And that's the only part of this plant that is used for food. The only thing is, if you see them as the ripe fruit on, well, it's the left side of my screen. I hope it might be for you too. If you see these red fruits and crack the fruit open yourself, which was a popular technique for many years, you're still not out of the woods with regard to the toxin hypoglycin A. And again, most of the fatalities in this particular instance are undernourished children who would go out and gather their own, mostly after a dinner which left them still hungry. And it wasn't until the 1950s when the cause of Jamaican vomiting sickness was first identified. It turns out that in between the picture on the left with the closed but ripe fruit and the picture in the center with the open fruit, in those last hours of ripening, the ackee metabolize the vast majority of the hypoglycin A in the arils, and they become edible after the fruit cracks open. And they are, in fact, the trademark ingredient in what is considered the Jamaican national dish, which is ackee and salt fish. This is hypoglycin A. It's actually a non-protein producing, non-proteogenic amino acid. We think of 21 amino acids that it takes to make animal life able to reproduce. But actually in the plant world, there are a number of non-proteogenic amino acids, and some of them are very impressive toxins. And hypoglycin A is certainly one of the major ones. Hypoglycin A interrupts a metabolic pathway called gluconeogenesis, which is how the human body goes from storing long-chain fatty acids into making blood sugar, glucose. Glucose, as you probably already know, is the only sugar that the brain can utilize. And so cutting off one's gluconeogenesis production is not a good plan for creatures who have a brain, which is many of us. Here's some of the details about it, about the acyl-CoA dehydrogenase, something I'm sure you talk about over breakfast every day. So the fact that this very sort of exotic toxin appears both in ackee and lychee and box elder maple was sort of like the universe telling the folks who reclassified plants as part of the APG that they were actually on the right track, since I don't know anywhere that this toxin occurs that is not part of the Sapondaceae. Here are a couple of the steps involved in this collapse of sugar. One thing that's fascinating to me is that there was a parallel disorder of horses in Europe that was called atypical myopathy. And it turns out that the cause of that disorder of horses, which had the same basic etiology as seasonal pasture myopathy, is caused by almost exactly the same thing, except they don't have box elder maple in Europe. What they have in Europe is a maple called sycamore maple, Acer pseudoplatanus. Now, those of you who know our sycamore trees know that they are in the genus Platanus. It's one of those cases where the United States and Britain are separated by a common language. When we say sycamore, I don't know, let's see here. Okay, here's a picture of a box elder maple. They get quite large, as you see. It's kind of unusual to see them made of a single trunk that is straight. They're usually a multi-trunked idea, and they are usually leaning over in some direction. And in fact, I used to think that the only reason to keep a box elder maple was that you wanted it to fall on something. I lived in a house on Lake Lansing, and during the big ice storm of New Year's Day of what year I forget, I'm afraid, uh, one of our box elder maples fell on the house, took the chimney right off. Another of them fell over and crushed the two-story former ice house, which we were having as a garage at the time. They are our only maple with compound leaves. And as you can see on the picture in the lower right, sometimes those leaves are three leafleted arrangements. Now, those of you who know the terms of leaf arrangement know the word opposite. For instance, if you look at the top leaf that's clearly depicted, well, actually, all those leaves, the first leaflet you see is the terminal leaflet, and then just back down the petiole from that are a pair that are inserted on either side of the main rachis. That's an opposite arrangement. I think I have a picture of opposite leaf arrangement here. Clearly not as handy as I hoped. All right. Sorry for any dizziness this causes. Go back here. Anyway, all maples have opposite leaf arrangement. And that's good to know because, in my opinion, this form of box elder, as you see in the lower right picture, with three leaflets, can look almost exactly like poison ivy, which is also a three leaflet compound leaf. But poison ivy never has opposite leaf arrangement. So if you see what looks like poison ivy, but it has opposite leaf arrangement, that tells you that you are probably looking at a seedling box elder maple. I've never heard of anyone getting a skin reaction from a box elder maple. These are fast growing. Many people mostly think of them as weeds. The picture here, the main picture on the left side, shows the female flowers of box elders are what we call dioecious. That is, male and female parts, flowers, and ultimately pollen and fruit, only occur on separate individuals. So a box elder with seeds is not going to make staminate flowers because males and females are on separate specimens. The male flowers are on the right of these two pictures. Female flowers that you see on the left are reduced to just the pistils, the pollen collecting section of the female flowers. And ultimately will produce these hanging clusters of fruits. And of course, that was the problem for horses who did not receive a great deal of supplementary food as part of their rations, would go out and forage for themselves. And when finding a box elder in late fall and early winter, females would have these hanging clusters of seeds, which the horses would mistake for an edible product and then eat them until they came down with seasonal pasture myopathy from these seeds and their hypoglycine A content. Stephanie Wahlberg, whose name is on the reference at the bottom of the slide, is actually on staff at the veterinary college at Michigan State University now. I don't know how they got her on staff, but congratulations to them for acquiring the services of this eminent scientist who helped to solve this huge mystery. The sycamore maple, which is not the same as a sycamore, but like I said, this is the case where we are separated by a common language. In the UK, when someone says a sycamore tree, they mean a sycamore maple, almost always. The genus Platanus, which we call sycamores, in the UK are referred to as plane trees. There are some other cases where we are separated by a common language. Those of you who know the trees in the genus Tilia that we call American basswood or linden trees, in the UK, those trees in conversation are called lime trees. So if someone says, meet me by the pub at the big lime tree, you're not looking for citrus, you're looking for a basswood of sorts. It turns out that the hanging chains of seeds of Acer pseudoplatanus were also responsible for atypical myopathy from exactly the same toxin in Europe. Again, the Sapondaceae turns out to be the right call. Here's the leaf and the developing seeds of a sycamore maple. MSU has a few on campus. picture on the right of this pair shows the female flowers. On the left are the male flowers, clearly distinguishable by their anthers of pollen. Our sycamore in the genus Platanus are often easily distinguishable by their, yes. This is a slide I made from papers uh, written. The predominant author of these papers was named Fowden, and he assayed these toxins in the seeds of a wide number of maples. The red squares indicate species and varieties whose fruits contain potentially toxic amounts of these hypoglycin A and B materials. Hypoglycin A is vastly more toxic than hypoglycin B. So the species whose boxes represent fruit depicted in green are those that are generally regarded as non-toxic, whereas the ones in red are considered to be the most toxic of the genus. Uh, Maples can also, if you are a person who keeps animals in the horse family or in the camel family, and the camel family would include llamas, alpacas, guanacos, and various things. They are much more susceptible to eating leaves of these trees, which cause toxic oxidation of hemoglobin in the blood. This oxidation results in the blood being transformed into carrying a product called methemoglobin, which unfortunately for the animal is not capable of supplying oxygen. Certainly the most dangerous of these maples is the red maple, Acer rubrum. Acer saccharum is the sugar maple. This is the big leaf maple, which is a maple restricted to the northwest of the United States, the southwest of Canada, including British Columbia. And these seeds, as you see, have these little irritating hairs. They can actually get a nettle-like irritation of the skin and mucosa from having these stiff little hairs get stuck in their skin or tongue or whatever. I don't know of any other maple that has this particular morphological character. So the ultimate advice here is, even though we always considered the maples to be such an innocent genus of plants, if you raise horses or llamas or alpacas, Maples are not innocent indeed, and you would greatly improve your chances if you learned which ones your animals could not eat and made sure to keep them away from any of their quarters or pastures or whatever. Recent research has pointed to gallic acid in maple leaves as one of the main triggers of the oxidative anemia of their blood in this case. Here's what red maples look like. They're actually considered the most common tree in eastern North America. So they have been used in landscaping, but they're also a natural constituent of woodland and quite common in Michigan. That's a flower head on the left. The female flowers are those long red sticky appendages that you see sticking up, and the rounder objects underneath them are the developing anthers, which will be the pollen-bearing portion of the male flowers, which in this case, even though they're on separate flowers, they appear on the same tree. So instead of being dioecious, they are monoecious. There's my information in case anyone wants to make contact with me. Um, my email is the carring3 at msu.edu, and I'm happy to take any toxic plant questions. In the cases of less famous plants, it's probably easier for me to help you if you send me a digital picture of the plant that is causing you concern.
Thank you so much, Peter. That was very interesting. And I'm sure there's some questions. Um,
Happy to hear them if they're
and Sarah,
easily made.
I have a question in terms of the picture you showed of the maple seedlings that hang down. I have a maple, I think a sugar maple, and I'm curious, how does it work for um why sometimes those pods fall and why like some years I have them and some years I don't. So is it, I'm just, it talk to me about why that is, where they can happen sometimes and not happen sometimes, and then yeah.
Well, of course, sugar maples flower quite early in the growing season. And so it's quite possible in some years that a late frost will wipe out either the male or the female flowers at the point where they are at anthesis. And if that happens, in the fall, when they have ripe seeds, they won't. When they should have ripe seeds, they won't. And of course, as you know, sugar maple samaras have a wing, and where the seed part is very round, not quite spherical, but almost. Whereas if you look at Norway maple, probably our most common street planted maple, Norway maple's fruits have flat seeds. Red maple seeds are more round than Norway maple, not as round as sugar maple. Does that help you in any way?
Yeah, thank you.
Some years are great seed years for sugar maples and some aren't. Apparently, judging by the amount of sugar maple seeds I see on the sidewalk when I walk around the block, last fall was probably the end of a good year for sugar maple seed.
It was a great year for Norway maple seed too. That's
Yeah,
a ton of them in my front lawn.
right. In my world, almost every year is a great year for Norway maple seed. It's one of the reasons they are so invasive.
Their sap also, if you break off a leaf and look at the attachment site, it's very milky.
Yes, it's one
But
of the ways to identify Norway maple in most cases. I don't
in
know of
my
any other.
neighborhood, there's several people that actually tap them in the spring. Um, is there any danger there?
I don't think so. I've never heard of anything toxic or dangerous about Norway maple, and they have been used as a source of sweet syrup in indigenous peoples in Europe. The idea of cooking Elmer's glue down to a sweet syrup, I find fairly untenable, but that's my personal bias speaking, not anything I know about the chemistry of Norway maple. Anyone else have a question?
Peter, I understand you teach toxic plants to vet students at MSU.
I do.
What are
Yes.
some of the most common poisoning situations with animals that you hear about or teach about?
Okay.
Start with cats.
Peter, yeah. When you refer to the box elder maple, is that what us lay people would call a box elder tree?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Those are interchangeable terms in most cases. And again, they make recognizable maple seed, and they are our only maple that has compound leaves. In fact, one of the other common names for box elder is ash-leafed maple. Again, referring to the compound, pinnately compound nature of the leaves and their leaflets. And again, I have seen specimens that as young seedlings had 3 leaflets, and until I noticed the opposite arrangement of the leaves, I was wholly convinced that I was looking at poison ivy. But of course, poison ivy leaves are always alternate in their arrangement on the stem.
So you gotta answer Roy's question about common toxic plants to what about pets like dogs and cats? What the most common one? That's what he asked.
Or if anyone else has a question, yeah, I was just curious about other toxins that show up in with animals at the vet school. But Barb has a question. Go ahead, Barb.
Actually, I put my question in the chat. I'm not sure how well I can communicate with this mask. Was wondering if any animals, if there are some animals that are resistant to the toxin.
Excuse me, I'm having a dog storm in my living room.
Does someone want to check my question in the chat? Because I can't talk very well with this mask, but where I'm at, I need to have the mask on.
Okay.
Yeah, Barb asked if some animals tolerate the toxins and are able to eat maple seeds.
I don't know of any animals that eat maple seeds who can get by with no problems. And again, the horse family and the camel family are really the 2 groups that are most heavily implicated for having trouble here. In my world, horses and cats have the largest toxic plant list to be concerned about. And of course, in cats, probably the most common poisoning in cats deals with lily family plants, especially lilies themselves. So if you're the kind of person who brings Easter lilies into the house during the Easter season, they are exceptionally dangerous for cats, since approximately a leaf and a half to 2 leaves is a fatal dose for most cats. And some cats, of course, absolutely chew on everything they can find in the way of living plants and can get into trouble for that reason. The lily group is most toxic for cats, and the problem is it causes tubular necrosis of the kidneys. And that also includes the outdoor daylilies in the genus Hemerocallis, which are also very dangerous for cats. When it comes to dogs, problem for dogs is that dogs learn berry picking from us. And one of the berries they get into that what causes the most common poisonings in dogs are the plant we call pokeweed or Indian poke, Phytolacca americana, a plant it's a very beautiful plant, gets to 5 or 9 feet tall and has usually a red-purple stem and then rather unimpressive flowers that turn into hanging chains, if you will, of almost black berries. The problem with the berries is they have toxic seeds inside. Thomas Jefferson used to make pokeberry pie for his visitors, but he knew to strain out the seeds. Since I don't recall he ever poisoned anyone, he was apparently quite successful, and his visitors found it quite surprising that he could do this. I have never made pokeberry pie myself. Pokeberry is more commonly known as the source of greens, but in order to be safe, pokeberry has to be harvested very early in the growing season when its young shoots have not yet developed any red or purple pigments in the stems. And in the area where they were used most commonly as food, which is the southern Appalachians, the cooking technique involved boiling the new shoots in at least what we call 2 waters. That is, where you boil a plant in water and then pour that water off, add new water, and repeat. Twice is called doing it in 2 waters. And then these double boiled new shoots would often be sauteed, often in bacon fat or something, before it was actually served to anyone to eat. And I would counsel you that cheating on these steps is not a good plan for us mammals.
There's another question in the chat about whether Norway maple is a non-native tree from Catherine Davis.
Yes, Norway maple is a non-native European maple. Its Latin name is Acer platanoides, which means the maple that looks something like a sycamore, but it is not the tree that is actually called sycamore maple. That's Acer pseudoplatanus.
Sam's got a question. Feel free to unmute yourself.
Yeah, that was that what you're talking about right now, Peter, is what kind of provoked this question with Norway maple being non-native, but also invasive.
Yes.
Then there's other ones from Europe, like you mentioned this Ace or pseudoplatanus, and then I guess there's a version of our Platanus occidentalis or sycamore. Is it Platanus acerifolia? But those trees are seem to be more well behaved, right? Like the Acer pseudoplatanus on campus, there's a few species there, maybe a few representatives, but I don't know that they're very prolific at all. So I'm just curious,
Well,
what's
I don't know the sycamore maple as being invasive.
that's what I'm getting at. And I'm wondering why that would be. Like, for instance, because the Norway maple is so prolific. Do they just, do they just not seed as heavily, or why they don't spread all over the place?
Well, there are some places where sycamore maples do spread, but
Hmm.
I've never seen them coming up spontaneously in Michigan. That doesn't mean they can't, it just means I haven't ever seen it.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And that goes with this um, European version of sycamore. I think it's Platanus acerifolia. Blood good. There's this variety that I think people. It used to be that was preferred over our native species, our native plant, based on its resistance to some anthracnose or something like that.
right. Um, for sure.
But that doesn't seem to be spreading around either. It doesn't come up, pop up in the woods or anything that
Right.
I know of.
I have a very large American sycamore in my front yard. It is called Platanus occidentalis, which means the Platanus from the west. But of course, it was named by a European who in New England saw these trees, and they were clearly very far west from the English version. The main difference being fruit occurs singly on each fruiting stem on our native sycamores, whereas they are usually two in number uh, on the European plane trees. And again, our native sycamores can come up from seed quite readily, but as a native component of our flora, they are not considered invasive in the sense that they are native, mostly stream edge or moist lowland forest species.
Yeah, kind of bottomland is the
Exactly.
place for those guys.
Right.
On a related note, I just want to mention that Carolyn Miller, who was going to be with us last week, has rescheduled to this coming week. So she'll be here on the 17th, and she tends to the native plants at the MSU along the river and other parts of the MSU, and also helps with invasive species removal. So um, we will get to hear from her after all next week. Um, while we're on the topic of native plants, I just wanted to mention that.
Right.
I wonder if I can interject something. You were talking, there's the conversation's been about toxic plants to animals, and a lot of people don't know this, and this isn't a toxic plant, but if any of you have birds or know people who have birds, aerosols kill them. Glade plugins kill them if they're in your house and they're your pet. It's happened to a couple of friends of mine, and I just wanted to pass that information along.
Thank you. Feel free to chime in anytime.
Okay.
Righto.
That probably is a dialogue on its own. It's like indoor pollution and indoor toxins.
Truly.
Maybe a year's worth of dialogue, but I'm really glad you brought that up. That was the Linda Carrington.
That was the Linda Carrington. Yes.
The Linda.
Except no duplicate.
Maybe this is another good time if any of you have topics you would like to suggest, or if you'd like to facilitate one of these conversations in a coming Wednesday morning. We've got quite a few good ones scheduled this month. After Carolyn, Nick Dupuis, who is the chief planner for Birmingham is going to talk about their experience with a leaf blower ban. And then Emily Conway on the 31st is going to talk about a prairie restoration that she's been involved with.
Roy, could you say that again about this planner from Birmingham? Who is that?
Nick Dupuy, the chief
Nick?
planner with Birmingham, is going to talk about their leaf blower ban.
And when was that?
That is on the 24th. Okay. We have about 10 more minutes here. We can open it up to any other topics that are on people's minds. Thank you again, Peter, for the stimulating conversation.
If you want, we could have a conversation someday about toxic house plants, since there are quite a few.
Barb, you have a question. Thank you for that offer, Peter.
Yes.
Oh, you're clapping. Thank you.
There's more in the chat. One that says, can you discuss the invasive nature of Norway maples? What allows them to successfully spread?
Well, in my opinion, the fact that they germinate quite easily, and the ideal conditions for germination are when they embed themselves in lawn grass and are protected from the most extreme sunshine and given a constant source of moisture next to the ground, such as lawns very often trap moisture in the turf itself. These are ideal conditions for seed germination in Norway maples. Norway maples, if you have one, know that they produce a tremendous amount of seed. And like I say, during my dog walks, I see thousands of them on the sidewalk every time I step out of the house, just about. So clearly having a seed bank for Norway maples is not a huge problem to acquire.
Anything else on people's minds? Sarah?
I have a question in terms of, I have, when I pull it up on my phone, when I take a picture and pull it up on my phone, it's called Eastern Red Cedar. And I have a ton of those that just keep popping up, and they look nice, and the deer don't eat them like the arborvitaes. So what is your thought on Eastern Red Cedars?
Well, Eastern Red Cedars, as far as I know, are actually a juniper. So again, if you are keeping horses or cattle, my counsel to you is, since juniperous plants contain isocupressic acid, it's not a good idea to let any animal who is pregnant, especially late in the term, access to eating isocupressic acid containing plants, since that is the compound that in ponderosa pine is famous for late term abortion in cattle.
Wow.
And so if you are breeding these animals or expecting to and hoping to, my counsel would be not to allow juniperus into the food resource because of that.
So if I don't have any of that, then it's no big deal, and they're not
if
considered
you
invasive
don't
or
have
anything?
any of that, any animals that reproduce that are having access to it, I think you're probably in good shape.
Okay.
I've never heard of any toxicity on any grounds other than the isocupressic acid part.
Okay. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Kim?
Hi, yeah, this is slightly off topic. I've been trying to find a native to Michigan cherry tree, hopefully something smaller, not as tall as the black cherries.
Yes.
Do you know if there's ones that is still native to Michigan, or have they all been grafted so much that there really aren't any?
Well, you probably know of a cherry called choke cherry, named after how delicious the fruits are. Um, choke cherries are Prunus virginianus, I believe. They are small. They don't get to be anything like the size of the Prunus serratina, the wild black cherry. However, if you are hoping for resplendent display of flowers, they are not so much. They are not as showy as the wild black cherry, and certainly they have never been tamed for their flower displays in the way that many of the Japanese heritage cherries have been.
Yeah, I was hoping to find a cherry tree that I could put in my front yard, mainly just for flowers and fruit for the birds. But it needs to be something that doesn't get excessively tall, because otherwise it's going to end up in the power line.
Right. Well, the choke cherry is a possibility. The fruits, even though I made choke cherry preserve jelly for a meeting of the National Wild Food Association many years ago. And the amount of sugar it took to make those delicious was roughly comparable to the amount of sugar it took to turn around the economy of the entire state of Louisiana.
Oh, wow.
So there we have it. But they do make fruit that birds either have no taste buds, or their idea of what constitutes okay dinner is a whole lot different than for us. So choke cherry is a possibility, except that I don't know of anyone who's ever received a bouquet of choke cherry flowers. They are just they're not as showy as you hope. Um, no one is going to stop by your house spontaneously and leap out of the car with their digital camera because of your choke cherry being in flower. And the fruits are more or less black in color, and they don't call them choke cherries for nothing.
Gotcha.
Right.
Um, with regard to, not wanting to increase non-native plants, the cherry trees that are planted on, different, they're like grafted onto other stocks.
Yes.
Do those reproduce and become invasive, or are they more contained?
I'm not aware of varieties of cherry that are grown for their delicious fruit becoming invasive. I would be happy to have them invade my yard, since eating them is one of my weaknesses as a self-control issue. But there we have it.
Thank you.
You're
This
welcome.
This has been the Peter Carrington Comedy Hour.
Thank you.
Any parting words or questions before we sign off? Thank you so much for joining us, everybody.
So, Roy, there was a question in the chat, but I don't remember what it was that hasn't been addressed.
All right.
Thank you.
Check.
Is the box elder a strong supporter of the native ecosystem? Is it a host plant for many insects, for example? From Catherine.
I am not aware of its being a keystone resource for anybody except box elder bugs. Box elder bugs, which you might be aware of, are black. They appear to have a red, almost X across the back where their wings fold up and cover the abdomen. I have never heard of anyone complain about the lack of box elder bugs in their neighborhood. A problem with them is they try to get into your house to spend the winter. And I don't believe that they are a snack item for human beings. The red coloration is usually considered a warning. And for all I know, they concentrate hypoglycin A, but I don't know that. I made that up.
What did you say the warning was?
The what was?
What did you say the warning was?
Oh, the red X on their back.
Okay.
They constitute the edge of the wings where they fold over the back. You know how true bugs in the order Hemiptera, generally their wings fold up and cross over the abdomen when they are wearing them instead of flying with them. And in the case of box elder bugs, they reveal a kind of the red edges to their wings make a kind of red X over their abdomen as they are pedestrians.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Hope to see you next week, if not sooner. And,
yes, thank you for your kind attention to all this.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Have a great day.
Have a good week.